Kenichi is your average Japanese salaryman, and one day, while overworking himself as usual, he collapses to the floor. Normally, this would be where he gets sent to another world, but in Kenichi's case, he just survives and sues his company so he can retire on a farm. Life has been going pretty well for him, but all of a sudden, while he's making lunch for himself, he vanishes and appears in the middle of the forest. He tries looking around to figure out where he is, but all he finds is the skeleton of a fallen knight and a bunch of unfamiliar plants. He has watched a lot of anime in his lifetime, so he knows this is probably an isekai adventure. To confirm it, he yells out "status window" to see if something happens. To his surprise, a status screen does indeed appear, so he is definitely stuck in another world, and honestly, he's fine with that. He checks out his status, but he's a bit confused since he can't see any HP bar on the screen. However, he does have his Amazon account, so he can still make as many impulsive purchases as he wants. He also has access to an item box, so he picks up a handful of weeds to test out what the item box can do. He puts the weeds in his item box and figures out that he can separate and retrieve the individual components from the items he puts in it. He also decides to test out the store, so he takes a look at it, but unfortunately, he still needs money to buy things. There's a prompt that says he's allowed to trade items in his item box for money, but right now, all he's got is a couple of weeds, and those aren't worth much. He has literally nothing valuable to trade for money, so at this rate, he's probably going to starve. But just then, he notices the shiny equipment on the dead knight, and since he's dead anyway, it's not like he needs it anymore. And the first thing Kenichi does is buy some daily necessities and some bread from the store. Afterwards, he buries the knight's skeleton to pay his respects and leaves the area on the new bicycle he bought. He's searching for some kind of settlement so he can talk to some people and earn some money, but he has no idea where he is. For now, he decides to just set up camp for the night since he's not going to find anything today. However, if he doesn't find a city, he plans to resell some of the things he buys from the store to gain a massive profit. If he does that, he should be able to survive and thrive in this world. But there's just one problem. Until now, Kenichi hadn't considered that it would be dangerous out in the middle of the woods. Once night falls, he gets surrounded by a pack of wolves, and they don't look like they are friendly. Kenichi freaks out because he knows he's dead meat if he doesn't act fast, so he turns to his store and immediately tries to purchase the biggest gun he can find. Unfortunately, guns aren't available, so he settles for the next best thing and buys a bunch of fireworks. The fireworks scare the wolves a little, but it's ultimately not enough to get rid of them. Kenichi starts looking for something else. He eventually finds a slingshot and uses it to fire balls at the wolves. The force from the balls is so strong that it knocks a couple of the wolves out and makes the rest reconsider their options, since Kenichi clearly isn't as easy a target as they thought. Once the wolves back off, Kenichi immediately rushes over to his bike and rides into the night to get as far away from wolf territory as possible. By the next morning, Kenichi is exhausted from all the biking he did, but he's still got no idea where he is. He buys a ladder and a telescope so he can climb up one of the trees and look at his surroundings. Thankfully, he manages to spot a city over in the distance, so he should be able to start earning money if he heads over there. He begins the long journey through the grasslands, but as he finally makes it to the main road, he nearly ends up getting run over in the process. The guy in the cart apologizes for nearly hitting him, and since he feels bad about it, he offers to give Kenichi a ride to the city. He introduces himself as Fuyo, a merchant, and the woman in the back of his carriage is traveling Bard, so she's a fellow passenger. While they ride, Fuyo mentions how Kenichi is dressed pretty strangely, so he asks him what he's heading to the city for, and Kenichi responds, saying he plans to open a business there. Eventually, they make it through the city gates, so Fuyo drops Kenichi off in front of his store and Kenichi helps him unload his cargo. Fuyo thanks Kenichi for his help, but Kenichi is the one who should be thankful here since really helped him out. To show his gratitude, he gives Fuyo a pouch of pepper, but once Fuyo realizes what this is, he warns Kenichi not to sell it in this city. There's a spice mafia called Bacopa, and they have a total monopoly on the spice market, so if Kenichi tries to compete with them, they might send the Boeing assassin after him. Kenichi hadn't realized that simply selling his goods could be so dangerous, so he is thankful for Fuyo's warnings. Fuyo normally wouldn't want to risk drawing the attention of Bacopa, but since it's a private deal between him and Kenichi, he decides to buy the pepper. Kenichi tries to tell him he doesn't have to pay for it, but Fuyo insists since a merchant never accepts anything for free because that would mean he owes Kenichi a favor. Kenichi can understand that, so he accepts Fuyo's payment, but even though he was giving Fuyo a discount, he still got a lot more than he was expecting. He only paid 1,000 yen for that pepper, but Fuyo paid him the equivalent of 100,000 yen for it. Kenichi walks around town for a bit, and he eventually finds a local inn and restaurant, so he heads in and is greeted by the hostess Azalea. He tells her he is here for lodging, and she would be happy to help with that, so she shows him to the front desk. The price for one room is 1 copper coin and payment has to be made up front, so Kenichi gives her the money. Now all she needs Kenichi to do is write his name in the contract, but Kenichi suddenly realizes that he doesn't know how to write in this country's language. Azalea notices Kenichi's strange clothing, so she asks if he's some kind of foreign ambassador, but Kenichi tells her that he's just in town because he wants to start up his own business. Azalea is supportive, but she doesn't think Kenichi will be accepted by the Merchant Guild since they require their members to be able to read, write, and do math, and he apparently can't. Kenichi is perfectly literate, but he just doesn't understand the language of this country, and as for math, he's pretty good at it, so that shouldn't be a problem. Azalea doesn't believe Kenichi really knows how to do math, so she asks him a basic multiplication problem to test him, and Kenichi answers instantly, basically making him a math genius in this world. Moving on, Azalea helps him write his name down on the contract, and since Kenichi needs to learn to read and write, he asks her if she would be willing to teach him this country's language. He offers to give her some candy in exchange for the language lessons, and as she hears candy, she's totally on board. It's basically impossible to get sweets in the Kingdom of Khadon since only nobles ever get to buy things like this. In fact, if the nobles found out that she has such wonderful sweets, they would probably try to take them away from her, but she refuses to let that happen. After Azalea calms down from her sugar rush, she begins teaching Kenichi about this world's language, and it's pretty easy for him to understand since it's similar to the katakana of Japanese. The numbers also follow the same decimal system, so it's not long before Kenichi is able to read and write perfectly. Azalea is amazed that he was able to learn the language in just a few hours, and if he can do that, then he's definitely smart enough to make a good name for himself as a merchant. So she's starting to consider him as a good marriage partner. Kenichi thinks Azalea is joking since he is old enough to be her father, so he doesn't take her statement seriously. He finishes the portraits he had been drawing of her, and when Azalea sees it, she is overjoyed because it looks exactly like her, and normally only nobles get to have their portrait taken. Kenichi has given her delicious candy and drawn a portrait for her, so she can't let him go without giving him something in return, which is why she jumps on top of him, and that night, Kenichi makes it clap. The next morning, Kenichi arrives at the Merchant Guild and meets with one of the representatives because he wants to register with them. The representative gives him some paperwork to fill out, and once he's done with that, all he has to do is pay the registration fee, and he will officially be a member of the Merchant Guild. The registration fee is 1 silver, but that's like 50,000 yen, so he can't afford to pay it all at once and asks to pay it in installments instead. Thankfully, the guild allows partial payments, so Kenichi is now an official member of the Merchants Guild. The receptionist hands him an ID stick and tells him to have it visible whenever he is conducting business because it serves as proof that he is part of the Merchant Guild. Now that he has registered, Kenichi decides to take a walk around the market to figure out how much things cost around here, and overall, all manufactured goods are way more expensive than they would be if he bought them from his store. The only things that are reasonably priced are foods, so while Kenichi is there, he buys a bag of fruit from a vendor. The next day, Kenichi is working on creating a stand so he can sell his goods out in town, and Azalea is impressed by how easy it was for him to make it. While Kenichi is putting up a couple of flyers, Azalea notices that he's using clothespins, and she's really interested in these since their design is really cool. The clothespins that exist in this world are made of wood and a rubber band, but they break so easily that they are practically useless. She asks Kenichi if he's selling these as well, but Kenichi hadn't even considered the fact that something as simple as clothespins could be so valuable. Later that day, Kenichi heads out into the market for his first day as a merchant and finds a good spot next to an old lady. He asks her if she's fine with him setting up his stall here, and she has no problem with it, so Kenichi pulls his stall out of his item box. Anama is impressed by Kenichi's selection of goods, so she looks around for a bit and spots the clothespin he is selling. She really likes them, so she offers to buy a couple, and Kenichi is surprised since he didn't think she would want to support her competition. Anama points out that there's no rule saying she can't buy from him, and besides, she doesn't plan on having some sort of rivalry with him anyway. As the day goes on, Kenichi's stall begins attracting customers, so his goods are being sold fast. Specifically, the clothespins have become quite popular for their reliability, so Kenichi could probably make a living off selling those alone. However, he knows other people will eventually create similar clothespins, so he can't rely on them forever. Just then, a man comes over to Kenichi's stall, and from the fact that he has a sword on his hip and really nice clothes, Kenichi can tell that the guy must be a noble. The man says he wants to have a look at Kenichi's knife, so Kenichi lets him test it out. After the man is satisfied with the sharpness tests, he asks for the price. Kenichi tells him the knife costs 2 silver, and that's pretty expensive, but the man can understand why since this knife is excellently made. He would love to buy it, but he needs a blade that's slightly longer, so Kenichi checks his shop to see if there's anything bigger available, and eventually, he manages to find a katana. The man absolutely loves the katana, but Kenichi tells him the price is 1 gold coin, and that's really expensive, so the man isn't sure if he should buy it or not. While Kenichi watches the man try to convince himself that the sword is a necessary expense, a cat girl starts sniffing his face and licks him. This is the first time Kenichi has ever seen any beast folk, so he's a little scared at first, but he soon calms down and asks them what they would like to buy. They tell them they want the cloth that he is using to cover his stall, and those originally weren't meant to be sold, but Kenichi is a businessman, so if they want the cloths, then he will sell them the cloth. He tells them one cloth costs 3 copper pieces, but since they want to buy 3, he will give them a discount and only charge 8 copper instead. That's a good deal for them, but the beast folk are really bad at math, so they don't understand what Kenichi said at all and assume he's trying to scam them. The nobleman tells the beast folk that Kenichi is telling them the truth, so they don't need to worry about being scammed. So they take his word for it and buy the cloths. The man also decides to buy the sword since it is incredibly well made, so by the end of the day, Kenichi made a really good profit. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, a maid who bought Kenichi's clothespins shows them to her master Primula. Margaret asks Primula if they can use these in the mansion since they would make her work a lot easier, and Primula thinks that's a good idea, so she tells Margaret to go buy some more tomorrow. Better yet, she wants to sell these clothespins at her own company since this is a goldmine of opportunity, so she runs off to ask her father for permission. That evening, Kenichi is taking a bath by the well, and he really wishes he could have a warm bath, but those haven't been invented yet, so he's going to have to make one himself. He looks through the store to see if there's anything he could use to make the hot bath, and he happens to find a barrel for sale, so he intends to fill it with water and put it over a fire so he can experience a hot bath again. And if his idea works out, then he might be able to make some profit from it. That aside, Kenichi has been benefiting a lot from his online store screen, but he has no idea how it actually works or how the packages even get to him in the first place. To be honest, it's way too good to be true, so Kenichi worries it might steal his soul as compensation at some point, but for now, there's no use worrying about it, so he decides to go to sleep. Meanwhile, out in the forest, there's a little girl named Anemone, and she's currently on the run. The next day, as Kenichi is setting up his store, he decides to update his inventory a little, so he puts some jewelry up for sale. These aren't valuable gems by any means, but they look pretty, so he should be able to make a decent profit off them. Just then, the maid from yesterday, Margaret, shows up and says she is here to buy some more clothespins from Kenichi. He asks her how many she wants to buy, and he's surprised to hear that she wants 100, but she has the money for it, so he finalizes the sale. While he is packing up the pins for her, Margaret notices some of the jewels he set out and asks if they are made of real diamonds. Kenichi tells her the jewels are all made from polished glass, but even so, they look really nice, so Margaret asks him to set one aside so she can come back and buy it later. Business goes on as usual for the rest of the day, but just as Kenichi is about to close up shop for the day, the beast folk from yesterday come back to his shop. They look pretty serious, so Kenichi is worried that they might be here to beat him up, but then Mylan gets up close to his face and tells the others that she definitely smells spices coming from him. The other beast folk begin celebrating and ask Kenichi to sell him some of his spices, but he is hesitant to do so after what he heard about the Spice Syndicate. He has no idea how they operate, or what they'll do to him if they find out that he's selling spices, so he doesn't want to risk it. The beast folk keep begging him to make an exception, but the people in the area tell them that they can't expect a new guy like Kenichi to risk his business for their sake, and the beast folk seem to get the message. Kenichi can't sell them any spices, but it technically won't be breaking any rules if he just shares a meal with them, so he invites the group to come eat with him. But it's going to have to be out in the woods so he doesn't attract any negative attention. The beast folk are really happy to hear this, so later that night, they all meet Kenichi and Inama on the outskirts of town so they can begin cooking. Kenichi is about to begin cooking and Inama asks if she can help, so he tells her to cut some of the veggies for him. However, when Inama takes a look at the veggies, she can't believe how vibrant and juicy they look. Kenichi explains that he got these from a foreign country and he can guarantee that these taste really good. While Kenichi and Inama are working on the veggies, Mylan and the other beast folk are busy in the river trying to catch some fish, and soon enough they manage to get a decent amount. Now that all the ingredients are ready, Kenichi begins prepping the fish with the spices and throws everything in a pot to cook for a while, eventually resulting in a meal that the beast folk absolutely love. They've never tasted anything like this before, so they are really thankful for the meal, but all this good food is making them crave alcohol really bad. Inama tells them to show some restraint since alcohol is really expensive, but Kenichi sees no harm in giving them a little to drink, so he pulls out a bottle of cheap booze and pours them a couple of glasses. But in exchange, he wants them to swear that they'll never tell a soul about the meal he made for them. Inama warns Kenichi that he's being a little too generous, but he doesn't see anything wrong with letting the beast folk enjoy themselves, especially since they seem to be good people. That night, they drink together, bathe together, and eventually fall asleep under the stars, and Miley seems to really like Kenichi now. The next morning, Kenichi returns to the inn and Azalea is a bit upset since he was out all night. Kenichi tries to explain that he was just hanging out with a couple of beast folk outside town, but judging from the cat lady fur on his jacket, she thinks Kenichi did a lot more than just hang out, and she's mad he chose to do it with a cat lady instead of her. Later that day, Kenichi is setting up his shop for another day of business, but as he is doing so, Margaret shows up with Primula to visit Kenichi's shop. Kenichi is distracted by Primula's beauty at first, but then he notices Margaret standing behind her and realizes they must be here to buy that necklace Margaret asked about yesterday. He brings it out and Margaret pays for it before giving it to Primula so she can inspect it, and with how well it is made, she's having a hard time believing that it's not made of real diamonds. She asks him if he has any more of these in stock. So Kenichi buys a bunch more from his store and brings them out to show her. Primula is incredibly impressed by the quality of Kenichi's products, as well as the fact that he has an item box, so she has a request to make of him. She tells him that she is the daughter of the owner of the Mallow Trading Company, and if Kenichi is willing to accompany her, she would like to introduce him to her father. Kenichi likes the idea of meeting with the owner of a major trading company, but he is hesitant to meet any big shots, since it might spell trouble for him. However, Anama tells him that Primula's father is well known around town, and everyone says he's a man of good character, so Kenichi doesn't have to worry about getting into trouble with him. Since that's the case, Kenichi agrees to go with Primula, so she invites him to join her in her carriage so they can go meet her father. Along the way, Primula shows him some clothespin replicas she had made, and although the wood shape was easy enough to copy, the metal clamp was too complex for her craftsman to make. Kenichi can understand why they weren't able to figure it out, because even he doesn't know how the springs are made, but he doesn't know that it's a complicated process. They eventually arrive at Primula's home, and Kenichi is amazed by how huge it is, but compared to the houses nobles around here have, Primula says this is actually pretty small. They head inside, and Kenichi is introduced to Primula's father, Mallow. They both greet each other, and Mallow invites Kenichi to have a seat so they can begin their discussion. Once Kenichi is settled in, he shows Mallow some of the jewelry he has, and Mallow is just as impressed as Primula was. On top of that, Primula tells him that Kenichi possesses an item box, and Mallow finds this interesting because he also has one. His time box is what allowed him to build his trading company to this level in the first place, so if used properly, he thinks Kenichi could become quite successful. Although, right now, Kenichi is just using it to store his supplies. Anyway, the reason Mallow wanted to meet with Kenichi is because he wants to discuss the possibility of Kenichi becoming the official supplier for the Mallow company. Kenichi had expected a proposal like this and assumes Mallow intends to market it in such a way to maximize profits. However, if that's what Mallow is after, Kenichi asks why he didn't just keep buying the items from his store for cheap and resell them later on. Mallow definitely could have done that, but that's a sneaky business tactic, and if Kenichi ever found out they were reselling his goods without permission, he wouldn't be very happy about it. Also, having a direct conversation with Kenichi like this gives Mallow an edge over his competitors who would eventually approach him as well. With that being said, Mallows would like to begin their partnership negotiations and offers to pay Kenichi 50% of the retail price for his goods. Kenichi could haggle for a better deal, but he's honestly okay with this since he's already making a ridiculous amount of profit from his online store, so he accepts Mallow's offer, and the two shake hands on it. He officially signs the supply contract, and the first few items he supplies Mallow with earn him over 1 million yen worth of coins. However, when Primula sees all the beautiful jewels Kenichi has in stock, she falls in love with them and asks her father if she can just buy these ones from Kenichi for herself. Mallow sees no problem with that, so Primula offers to pay him 10 gold coins for them, which is equivalent to 2 million yen. So for the first time since he got here, Kenichi has an 8-figure bank balance. Since he's doing so well for himself, he decides to finally begin setting things up for his quiet life and buys a home from his store. The next day, he leaves the city walls and heads out into the forest to look for a good place to set up his home. Before he left, he told Azalea about his plan so she wouldn't be worried, but she thought it was a bit strange that Kenichi was willingly choosing to live out in the dangerous forest instead of staying in the city. Once he finally finds a good spot, Kenichi purchases a weed whacker and begins landscaping the area, but he runs into a problem since even though other things from his store are pretty cheap, fuel is always expensive no matter what world you live in. There's nothing he can do about it though, so he deals with the high cost and keeps working until he has eventually cleared a path for himself to get in and out of the forest. After that, he needs to start working on getting rid of all these trees, so he buys a chainsaw and starts cutting. After several hours of hard work, Kenichi has finally managed to cut through a bunch of the trees in the area, so all that's left is to move them out of the way. However, when he tries to stuff the trees in his item box, it doesn't work. It looks like the trees are too long to fit, so he's going to have to bust out the chainsaw again and cut them down into more manageable pieces. He eventually shortens the trees into 10-meter logs, and this way he is able to fit them in his item box, so he's almost done with the tree removal. The only thing left to do is pull out all the tree stumps, but that's going to be a lot of work, and the sun is already setting, so he decides to come back and finish up tomorrow. The next day, Kenichi returns to the forest to finish the work, but after digging at the stump for a while, he realizes that this is way too much work for a middle-aged man like him, so rather than destroy his back over this, he decides to just buy a backhoe. However, once he actually sees it, he realizes he just spent 1.2 million yen on heavy machinery because he didn't want to do manual labor, and he's kind of regretting that, but at the same time, this means you won't have to work as hard, so maybe it was a worthwhile investment. He starts up the engine, but then he realizes that this thing runs on diesel, and his store doesn't sell diesel at all. He starts panicking since it would be a huge waste if he couldn't use the backhoe after he spent so much money on it. He thinks for a second and realizes he could probably make his own diesel if he mixes kerosene and some additives, but when he's about to try it out, he realizes he could destroy the backhoe's engine if he gets the proportions of the mixture wrong. So just to be safe, he decides to test out his mixture on a diesel generator first. After filling it up, he tries turning it on, and it seems to work fine, so he knows his homemade diesel will work with the backhoe, so he intends to return tomorrow to finish the job. In the meantime, he needs to do something about all the bugs out here, so the next day, he decides to head to a local magic shop to buy some bug-repellent magic stones. As he enters the shop, the wizard who owns it greets Kenichi and asks him where he's from since he hasn't seen him around here before. Kenichi explains that he's a foreigner who just recently set up a shop in town, and he's here because he wants to buy some bug-repellent stones. The wizard tells him that those stones cost 3 silver coins, but that's really expensive, so Kenichi tries to make a deal and offers to give the wizard 2 oranges if he can lower the price. The wizard has never seen oranges before, so he thinks they must be some kind of exotic fruit and agrees to give Kenichi a discount because of it. Later that day, Kenichi goes to talk to Inama, and she tells him that the wizard is a really knowledgeable guy, so he's a good person to have as a friend. Pretty much the exact opposite of the wanted criminal, Shaga, whose wanted posters have been hung up all across town. He's the leader of a notorious bandit group, so the reward for his capture is pretty big. In fact, that night, Shaga organizes a raid on a carriage full of slaves that were being transported, and who knows what he plans to do with them. The next day, Kenichi heads back into the forest so he can finally use his backhoe, and he no longer regrets his purchase because not only is it making his work a lot easier, but it's also really fun. Now, nothing can stop him from fulfilling his dream of living a quiet life in the woods, but after spending so much money on the backhoe, he's dangerously close to being broke, so he's going to have to put a hold on any further construction progress. A little while later, Kenichi goes to meet with Mallow and Primula again in hopes of selling them some salt and sugar for a good profit. Mallow tests the sugar, and he is certainly pleased with its quality, but he can't actually buy it off Kenichi. The state reserves all rights to sugar and salt, so Mallow would get in trouble if he purchased it from an unauthorized source. However, on the bright side, those jewels Kenichi sold him before are selling like crazy, so Mallow would like to purchase more of those immediately. The extra jewels Kenichi just sold earned him 15 gold coins, which is roughly 3 million yen, so now he has enough money to finally purchase that log cabin he found in his store. He honestly still can't believe that there's a whole cabin for sale in his store and for only 1.7 million yen too. It almost sounds too good to be true, but Kenichi isn't going to miss out on the deal, so he buys the log cabin. Unfortunately, the cabin must have been sourced from IKEA because when he purchases it, he gets buried in a pile of wood planks and some instructions that he doesn't know how to follow. He takes a moment to read over the instructions manually, and just as he had feared, assembling this thing is going to be a major pain in the ass to do. But he has already paid for it, so he has no choice but to get it over with. As Kenichi begins building, the beast folk from earlier happen to be passing by, and as a show of gratitude, they decide to help Kenichi out with his construction. Several weeks go by, and thanks to the beast folks' help, Kenichi has been able to make steady progress on his log cabin while also keeping his stall open. And in just under a month of work, the construction of the cabin is finally out complete. He couldn't have gotten all this done in such a short time without the help of the beast folk, so to thank them, he organizes a nice barbecue party. However, even though the cabin is finally complete, there are still a ton of things that Kenichi has to do on his own, like painting the walls and the roof and generating electricity. It took another month to get all his necessities worked out, but once everything has finally been taken care of, Kenichi's home is completely self-sufficient. He made a fence around his house and farm. And as for electricity, he set up a couple of solar panels. Now that he has finally finished setting up his dream home, the first thing Kenichi does to celebrate is to take a nice warm bath. Although, he still needs to figure out how to get indoor plumbing since he had to make several bike trips to fill up this bath. The next morning, Kenichi heads back to the inn to tell Azalea that he's finally done with his forest cabin, so he won't be staying at this inn anymore. Azalea is a bit surprised since she didn't think Kenichi was serious when he said he wanted to build a house out in the forest, but she's also happy that he could achieve one of his goals, even if it means she won't get to see him as often anymore. The day after that, Kenichi wakes up in his cabin, and since the weather is so wonderful, he decides to go out and take some photos of the local flowers. However, his little joyride is cut short when he nearly gets shot by an arrow. Kenichi is so surprised that he falls off his bike, but more arrows are fired at him, so he ducks for cover behind a tree. The ones firing the arrows are seen to be some new beast folk that happens to live in the forest, and in their defense they were out here hunting, so they instinctively attacked him. But even after realizing that Kenichi is the human who built a house in this forest, they don't care and decide to kill him anyway. Kenichi has no idea why these beast folk are attacking him, but he's not going to sit back and let them do as they please, so he reaches into his inventory and pulls out his slingshot to return fire. The beast folk get a little spooked since they weren't expecting the weak human to fight back, and they start reevaluating their choices once Kenichi throws fireworks at them and pulls out his excavator. The beast folk have no intention of waiting around to see what that thing can do, so they all run away, and Kenichi is left wondering what that was all about. But just then, he notices a wounded animal crying out in pain at the base of the tree. It has been shot in the leg and probably won't last much longer unless Kenichi does something quickly. He approaches the cat, but the cat doesn't trust him, so it snarls as he gets close. Kenichi doesn't want to get bitten, so he spends a little money buying some cushion armor in case the cat tries to bite him. But as he goes to remove the arrow, the cat hardly fights back, so it must be out of stamina. This makes it a lot easier to treat the cat's wounds, so he buys a bottle of alcohol to disinfect the wound and then applies some antibiotic cream. The cat's wounds have been taken care of, but there's still no guarantee that it'll survive out in the open like this, so Kenichi decides to take it back to his house. He sets up a blanket for the cat to rest on, but it still hasn't moved a muscle since he treated it, so he's starting to worry. He hasn't seen any vets since he came to this town, but there might be some kind of healing magic he can use, so he goes to ask the wizard about it. The wizard listens to Kenichi's story and realizes he must have found a bobcat, but he doesn't understand why Kenichi would want to bother healing it since he could easily kill it and sell its fur for a good profit. The wizard isn't going to be of much help, so Kenichi heads back outside, and as he does so, Miley happens to be passing by, so she jumps on him and starts sniffing around. She smells the scent of a bobcat on him, and her people see bobcats as messengers of God, so she's really excited and wants to see it for herself. She follows Kenichi back to his house, and as soon as she sees the bobcat, she can already tell that its injury was caused by the dog beast folk, so she swears to make them pay. In the meantime, the bobcat seems to be doing a bit better, but it keeps trying to lick its wound, so Kenichi is forced to stick a cone on its head. Miley is impressed by how capable Kenichi is when it comes to healthcare, so she asks him if he's a doctor, but he says he just knows a bit of first aid. Miley wants to thank Kenichi for saving the bobcat, so she goes outside and does a little quick hunting to get Kenichi some bird meat, and once she brings her catch back, Kenichi grills it for their dinner. After eating, Miley is exhausted, so she asks Kenichi to let her stay here for the night. Kenichi asks her if it's alright for her to just ditch her work and spend the night here, but she is more worried about the bobcat than she is about work right now. Kenichi agrees to let her stay the night, but he only has one bed, so Miley suggests that the two of them sleep together, and Miley ends up on top of Kenichi later that night. Several days later, the cat seems to be doing a lot better, so Kenichi decides to start working on his farm, but even though he can buy the seedlings and tools for his farm, he still has to think about his water situation because having to run down to the river every time he wants to water his crops would be a major pain to deal with. The first thing that comes to mind is for him to construct a well with a pump, but that'll have to be a job for tomorrow because he's too tired to do it today. He goes to bed, and the next morning, he wakes up to the feeling of the bobcat jumping on his stomach. As much as that hurt, he's happy to see that the bobcat is so full of energy, so he takes off its cone and releases it back into the wild to live its life. Now back to that well matter, Kenichi decides to take a few days off from running his stall so he can get to work on it. He drills a hole in the ground and installs an electric pump, so he now has access to fresh water whenever he needs it. To celebrate, he starts filling up his bath so he can take a soak, but all of a sudden, he hears Primula call out to him. He's surprised to see her here, so Primula explains that he didn't open his shop today, so she got a little worried and Miley told her about his log cabin, so she decided to visit him. She's impressed that Kenichi was able to build all of this on his own, but then she notices the giant excavator next to his house, so she asks him about it. Kenichi doesn't want to have to explain how that thing works, so he just says it's his summoned familiar to keep it simple. Primula totally believes him, but now she thinks Kenichi can do magic, so he asks her to keep this a secret when she gets back home. Speaking of which, at this time of day, the city gates must have been closed already, so Primula won't be able to get home anymore. Primula was already aware of that, which is why she intends to spend the night with Kenichi, and even when Kenichi warns her that he only has one bed, she still insists that it's fine. Just then, she notices the barrel behind him, so she asks what it's for, and Kenichi explains that it's a hot bath, so Primula gets excited and asks to try it out. By nightfall, Kenichi has warmed up the bath, so Primula gets in, and she absolutely loves the warm feeling. But the fact that she's in the middle of the woods makes her feel a little uneasy, so she starts calling for Kenichi. Kenichi tells her he's sitting right on the other side of the wall, but Primula says she would feel better if she could see him face to face. After she's done with her bath, Kenichi gives her a bathrobe to change into, and she's in love with how warm it feels, so she asks Kenichi if he can sell it to her. Kenichi tells her it's not for sale, but she keeps pleading with him, so he ends up agreeing to sell her a couple of bathrobes. Kenichi then gives her a nightgown to change into for bed, and Primula can hardly believe the variety of wonderful products Kenichi has on hand, so she's sure he will become the greatest merchant in the kingdom if he tried. However, Kenichi isn't interested in such a goal, since it would cause a lot of trouble for him if he caught the attention of the nobles in the area. All he wants is to live a quiet life and earn enough money to be comfortable, so Primula promises him that she will do whatever she can to help him maintain his quiet life. A little while later, they go to bed, but Kenichi doesn't want a repeat of what happened with Miley, so he decided to just buy a second bed for Primula for the night to avoid any funny business. Meanwhile, over in the outlaws' camp, Shaga seems to have received a job from someone really important, so this could spell trouble in the future. The next morning, Kenichi takes Primula back home, and while he's there, he decides to talk with Mallow about those bathrobes Primula asked about. Mallow is intrigued by the strange fabric, so he thinks it will sell really well. And since they are on the topic, Kenichi decides to bring up the possibility of selling something a little more spicy. Primula certainly seems interested, but Mallow shuts that idea down immediately. Just then, Margaret comes into the room to bring Mallow the ledgers he had requested, and since Kenichi seems a bit curious, Mallow explains that he is in the process of rewriting all the old ledgers because the Empire has just come up with a brilliant new system for tracking sales called double entry bookkeeping. Kenichi is taken aback since the double entry system was common back in Japan. This also leads him to recall something Mallow had said about the Empire's influence spreading faster thanks to the new inventions of a particular man. In fact, Mallow was just about to go test one of the latest inventions from that man, and to Kenichi's surprise, it was a pitcher pump. He already had his suspicions before this, but for someone to invent a pitcher water pump so easily would require prior knowledge of how it works, meaning there might be someone else in this world who was sent here from Japan, and Kenichi is slightly worried since he now has competition. Over the next few days, Primula would occasionally visit Kenichi and spend the night at his place, but tonight is special because she's going to be traveling for a supply run tomorrow, so she won't be able to visit for a while. She asks Kenichi if he still has that spicy nightgown because she'd like to buy it from him, so Kenichi asks if there's a guy she's trying to seduce, and Primula answers saying he's the one she's after. Kenichi doesn't know how to respond to that, but he doesn't think it's right for him to have that kind of relationship with Primula, especially since he's friends with Mallow. And there's no way Mallow would agree with Primula getting involved with an old man like him. However, Primula tells Kenichi that she already got her father's approval, so that won't be a problem. Even so, Kenichi still has way too many things going on right now, so he can't handle a relationship right now, and asks Primula if she would be willing to put the relationship discussion on hold for a while. Primula understands, but she says she would like to share the same bed as Kenichi at least once before she leaves, even if it's just to sleep next to him. The next morning, Kenichi gets an unexpected visit from a knight, and it turns out to be the guy he sold his sword to last time. His name is Norseball, and he was sent out here to investigate because there have been reports of a strange old man living in the woods, but since he already knows Kenichi, he can report back that nothing sinister is going on here. But before he leaves, he tells Kenichi about some interesting news he heard recently. There's a mage in the Empire who created this wonderful condiment called mayonnaise, and he somehow defeated a dragon with it. There's no doubt in Kenichi's mind that this mysterious man must have come from Japan, and with everything he has accomplished so far, Kenichi is feeling really outclassed here. Still, it's not like he's going to run into this guy anytime soon, so the next month goes by without issue. Kenichi is sitting at his stall one afternoon when he realizes that Primula's supply-run caravan should be returning soon, so he plans to visit her later today. However, just then, he hears a massive commotion in the town square, so he gets up to go see what it's about. Apparently, a caravan was attacked by bandits, and everyone aboard the caravan was kidnapped, including Primula. Mallow is seen begging the adventurers in the streets to help rescue his daughter, but since the bandit who kidnapped her is the infamous outlaw Shaga, no one wants to risk going up against him. and it will take days before the Knight's Order can organize a rescue mission under those circumstances. Meanwhile, Primula gets locked up in a cage by Shaga and his goons. She is still unharmed for now, but that's just because Shaga plans to sell her off to some sick nobles for extra money, and her chances of escaping on her own are practically zero. Mallow knows it's only a matter of time before Primula faces a terrible fate, so he is really desperate to save her and turns to Kenichi to beg for help. Now, Kenichi is in no way capable of fighting, but he cares about Primula a lot, so he ends up agreeing to do something about the situation. However, he doesn't have enough funds on hand to pull it off, so he tells Mallow he's going to need some money to make his preparation. Without hesitation, Mallow hands over a bag of gold coins, as he is willing to give Kenichi every coin he owns as long as he can bring Primula back safe and sound. He tells Kenichi that Shaga's base of operations is in the ruins 50 kilometers west of Dahlia, and that's quite the distance, so Kenichi is going to have to get himself a ride. He looks through the cars available in his store and ultimately decides to buy a truck, but before he does, he warns everyone that he is about to use summoning magic, so they should all back away. He then does this silly little chant to trick everyone into thinking this is actually summoning magic, and once his truck appears, he climbs on top and asks if there's anyone willing to come fight with him. Shaga has a massive bounty on his head, so if they manage to take him down, there's going to be a huge reward for everyone involved. However, as enticing as that sounds, no one takes Kenichi up on his offer since Shaga is too much of a threat. Kenichi is starting to worry that he might have to do this by himself, but then the bobcat he rescued last month comes up to him, and even though he can't speak cat, you can tell that the bobcat is saying it wants to help. Speaking of cats, Miley and the other beast folk also want to help Kenichi, since they still owe him a favor for all the help he gave them. Kenichi is glad to see that he has people on his side, so to prepare them for battle, he buys a compound bow for Miele and an axe and some swords for Miley's brothers. Just then, he hears someone else say they want to help, so he looks down and finds Norseball standing there. Kenichi feels a lot more reassured, knowing that an experienced knight will be coming with them, but he is a little curious as to why Norseball just happened to be walking through town in his full suit of armor. Norseball explains that he just got his new sword made with the steel Kenichi gave him, so he has been looking for an opportunity to use it all day, and slaying some bandits would be the perfect excuse. There's one more person who says they want to come along, but it turns out to be the magic shop owner, so Kenichi tries to tell him it's too dangerous for an old-timer like him. However, the old man reveals that he used to be a mage back in his day, and although he may be old, his fire spells are still just as deadly as they were in his prime. Kenichi agrees that the man would be useful in combat, so he lets him come along, but then Anama says she wants to come too. Kenichi tries to tell her to stay behind since there is literally nothing she could contribute in a fight, but even if she's not capable of fighting, she says she can still provide moral support and cook food for the group. She also promises to run away the second any fighting starts, so Kenichi won't have to worry about protecting her. He ends up agreeing to bring Anama along for moral support, but he draws the line when Mallow says he wants to come too, so he tells him to just stay here and wait for Primula's safe return. Kenichi once again asks if there's anyone else who is willing to come with them, but all the remaining people are too scared of fighting Shaga, so they all back away, and the crowd disappears. It looks like the 9 of them are going to have to do this on their own, so before they leave, Kenichi heads to the guild and registers himself as an adventurer, while also formally putting in a notice that he is going after Shaga's bounty. The group then sets out in Kenichi's truck, but as they leave the city, all the people who were too scared to fight begin mocking him because they think Kenichi is just going to run off with the money Mallow gave him. Meanwhile, in the ruins, Primula's cell is opened, so the girl Shaga captured as a slave can bring her some food. However, Primula notices that the girl is starving, so she offers to let her have the bread instead. The girl is grateful for Primula's kindness and begins eating right away. And while she eats, Primula asks her a couple of questions. She finds out that the girl is being held captive here as well, so she asks if she wants to escape with her. The girl would love to get out of here, but she doesn't think it's possible given their current circumstances. However, Primula is sure that it's only a matter of time before help comes for them. After getting close to the base, Kenichi and the others stop to take a break. Once they are done eating, Kenichi sits everyone down so they can begin their strategy meeting. Kenichi comes up with a basic plan of assault, and everyone thinks his plan is a good one, so they all get into position and Miley is sent out to do some recon. Kenichi is able to keep in touch with her by using some radios he bought, but to keep it simple, when Miley asks about the radio, he just tells her it's a magic device that allows them to talk over long distances. Now that Miley is in position to act as their scout, Kenichi and the others all climb into the truck so they can get going, and Anama is left behind for her own safety. Since there's no guarantee that they'll be able to win, Kenichi asks Anama to go contact the Adventurers Guild if they don't return within a day's time. Late into the night, Kenichi asks Miley for a status update on the bandits, and from what she can see, it looks like the bandits are having a party. In fact, most of the bandits are actually drunk right now, so this is the perfect chance for them to attack. Before they go in, one of the beast folk gets Kenichi's attention and hands him a walnut. Kenichi asks what this is supposed to be, so the beast man explains that it's a pill to help take Kenichi's mind off the fact that he's going to have to kill people. Apparently, that was good enough for Kenichi, so he takes a bite of the pill, and he is instantly sent on the most intense trip of his life. Kenichi hardly knows what's going on anymore, but he remembers he has a mission to do, so he gets behind the wheel and starts driving like a maniac through the forest. Over in the bandits' camp, all the bandits are still busy having a good time. All of a sudden, as two of them spot the truck approaching, they are shot in the head by Miley. Next up, they have to get through the castle gate, so the old man climbs on top of the truck's roof and casts an explosion spell to blow a hole straight through. By this point, the entire bandit camp has been put on high alert. But it's already too late as Kenichi and the others have made it inside. Since the bandits were drinking so much before this, they are all drunk and have no armor on, so Miley and her brothers are able to make quick work of the first few that get within striking range. Norseball then gets out of the truck and he's really excited to stain his new sword with the blood of his enemies. Kenichi is so impressed by Norseball's strength that he gets distracted and a bandit tries to use the opportunity to stab him in the back. But luckily, the Bobcat steps in to save him just in time. More bandits begin emerging from the ruins, so Kenichi decides to pull out the big guns and summons his backhoe to squish them. The beast folk keep doing their best to take out as many bandits as possible, and Norseball is over here flexing his superiority over the bandits. While Kenichi is tormenting the bandits with his backhoe, he accidentally tears a hole in one of the walls and finds a ton of the bandits' prisoners inside. He checks to see if Primula is in there with them, but to his horror, it looks like Shava had anticipated their rescue mission because he is holding Primula hostage at the top of the tower. Primula is relieved that Kenichi actually came to rescue her, but Shava is mortified because all his men have been wiped out. He assumed that a party would be sent to rescue Primula eventually, but he never could have imagined that they would be this strong. However, even with the current situation, Shava still thinks he has the upper hand, so he demands that Kenichi and the other all drop their weapons immediately if they don't want him to stab her right here. They all freeze in place since they don't want Primula to get hurt, but Kenichi has no intention of letting Shava escape. So while Shava isn't looking, he buys a laser pointer and tells Miley to fire a shot at Shava when he gives the signal. Miley gets the message, so Kenichi moves the laser pointer up to Shava's eye to blind him, and the second he lets go of Primula due to the pain, Miley fires a shot straight into Shava's shoulder. Kenichi runs up the stairs to get Primula to safety, but Shava has regained his vision and is getting ready to attack the two of them. Luckily, before he could do anything, the slave girl uses some kind of magic to knock him down the stairs, and once he hits the ground, he is perfectly lined up for Miley to give him a headshot. With that, the group is victorious and Primula is finally safe, so the first thing they do is send Nyanji back to tell Onama of the good news. Next, Kenichi stores his vehicles away and buys some clothes for all the prisoners they rescued, and while they are all cleaning themselves up, he notices the little girl and asks Primula to wash her. And while she's at it, he gives her a pair of scissors to cut her hair. Primula takes one look at the scissors and immediately asks Kenichi if he can sell her some more of these since it would be a really popular item. But then the other women remind her that she's naked, so she backs away in embarrassment. After everyone gets dressed, Kenichi goes to talk to the little girl and introduces himself to her. She tells him that her name is Anemone, and she has an important letter to hand over. It's a letter doxing the noble who is funding all of Shava's kidnappings, and Norseball promises to make sure said noble faces punishment for his crimes. With that, this incident is officially over and it looks like they'll be able to make it back to Dahlia safely. But first, everyone is really tired, so they all go to sleep for the night. This was the end of episode 4. Subscribe to not miss the next part.